Okay, well, according to me, that is 10:05.
Yeah.
So I think we should
That's,
get started. And just to make you all aware as well, we are recording this session. Just wanted to say that at the start. As most of you have discovered, we will be using the Q&A function. So the purpose of this webinar, and I suppose I should introduce myself. That's with all the flurry of the start. So my name is Emma Williams, and I am the Centre Coordinator for the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. Charlie, would you like to introduce
yeah.
yourself?
And I'm Charlie Lloyd. I'm a professor at the University of York, and I'm Deputy Director of the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre.
Yep. So thank you everybody for joining us and welcome. So we've got around about 55 minutes for this session. What we're going to do is have a bit of a presentation from Charlie and myself about the ECR development grant, and then obviously we'll open it up for Q&As at the end. Some of you have also, when you registered for the webinar, we did receive a few questions as well, so we'll talk through those towards the end. But please feel free to use the Q&A and put your questions in as we go along. And then after the presentation, which we think will be about 25 minutes, we'll then open up for Q&A. So with that said, shall we get started?
Yeah. So welcome everybody. I think you can, well, we'll have a session at the end for questions. As they occur to you, chuck them in the Q&As under the Q&As button as they occur to you, because there's no point in waiting. Good. Okay. So that's my welcome. Welcome everybody. And we're going to give you an overview of the fund, sort of support we provide, which I think's a really important part of the sort of package that we put together at the centre, the application process, and then I say, as we've said, this Q&A session. Okay, let's go on. Okay, here comes the overview. So in terms of the centre's mission, we've been funded for 5 years by the Economic and Social Research Council. So that's a big grant. And we're 3 years in now, just over 3 years into this 5-year period. And it's jointly funded, it's jointly led by the University of York and the University of Leeds. And we have a big group of co-investigators spread across mostly universities, a couple of other institutions actually, but 23 of those, and lots of external partner organizations who we've been working with on our research and other work. And I guess in terms of these grants, that's reflected in our focus on partnership in terms of delivering these ECR research projects. And our aims are exploring how vulnerabilities are produced, compounded, and mitigated by policing. So recognizing that vulnerabilities are sometimes produced by the policing process itself, as well as looking at ways that for the police to reduce the vulnerability of people. Developing new understandings of vulnerability. It's a tricky word, vulnerability, and there is no clear definition, but we're very interested in how different agencies understand vulnerability, and also a strong focus on co-production of research across a range of disciplines. Our program has a place-based component in terms of looking particularly at issues in Bradford and Leeds to understand how police and public services respond to vulnerabilities in particular locations. But also we have our problems-focused research, which I'll say a bit about in a sec. And we aim to shift the evidence base and public debate about policing to rethink the role of the police within a plural conception, meaning we're thinking about policing more broadly. We're thinking about the policing that is done not just by the police, across different agencies, and that's a key part of our perspective. Let's move on to the next, please. Thank you. We've established our values and principles, and we take these very seriously. And our principles include a focus on the integration of data, methods, and disciplines. So it's not sort of excluding in any sense. Co-production is another one of our values, which we've taken again very seriously in terms of working with service providers, stakeholders, but also vulnerable people, and have had a strong emphasis on people with lived experience being involved in our research. Co-production is a tricky word again, so there are different levels, but we've tried to engage people with lived experience in a range of different ways across our program. We're interested in responsible innovation, so experimenting with new approaches, but in sensitive ways. And we have a focus on actionable knowledge and impact, as I guess you would all expect from a ESRC major investment of this sort. We're not just about academic research. We're looking at generating actionable knowledge that really has an impact. We have a commitment to open research and transparent processes, and a really strong commitment to equality, diversity, inclusion. That's reflected in the guidance on this program. And finally, a goal of harm reduction and an assurance to do no harm. So at the very basic level, we do hope that our research is not causing harm. But in this highly sensitive area, that's a real issue. And we have to be really careful about thinking through our methodologies and our ethics. Okay, next one, please. This is what we've called the Toblerone. Maybe not all of you are even familiar with a Toblerone bar, but this is like a cross-section through a Toblerone. That's what we call it. And this shows you again this idea of the place-based work in Bradford and Leeds, number one. Number two, problem-oriented research. So that's our county lines, domestic abuse, homelessness, mental illness. On each of these topics, we have a 2-year research project, sort of substantial research projects. And you can read more about that on the website on those projects. Because, as I'm about to say, we're obviously not looking to do the same project with our ECR projects. So it's good for you to gen up on what we're doing. Links and so on, absolutely fine. But obviously we don't want to replicate our work. And then finally, our third strand there, public engagement. We're doing surveys and research looking at how the general public understand vulnerability in policing, and indeed the degree to which they would prioritize that sort of work among wider policing work. Great, next please. So turning specifically to the ECR Development Fund. Right at the start, when we were, during COVID, writing this proposal, and it took a long, long time with the ESRC, struggling again with COVID and its impact. So it's a long process, but we were absolutely adamant that we would have a real focus on ECR development, not ticking the box, but really genuinely trying to do something that develops academics and other researchers in terms of their careers and brings them into thinking about the area that we're sort of fascinated by and committed to. So that's the backdrop to this. And the aims of this fund are to build that research capacity and capability in line with our overall aim, and to support research led by, and we mean led by, ECRs. So it's a chance for some to be a PI for the first time, not necessary, but in a lot of cases, I think that's what's happened, and that's a real priority for us. And that these projects generate new knowledge, focus on innovation, and as I said, this key issue of effective partnership working, co-production, impact, and this idea that hopefully these grants will allow people to put together larger grant applications and follow on research, which we'll ask you about in the application process on the form. So these projects need to be aligned with our strategic priorities and complement rather than duplicate work within the centre. And as I say, we expect them to be in tune with our values and principles. Thanks. So the fund seeks to encourage co-production, which I've already talked about, multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, so far as that's possible with a small grant like that. And we recognise, that we can't expect, massive interdisciplinary programs of work. Applications that address equality, diversity and inclusion. I really should emphasize that, because in the past, we quite often had applications that have just kind of ignored this aspect and said, please note that this is a real commitment, especially in this field. It's hard to think of a project where it's not relevant. And we encourage applications that have the potential to secure long-term follow-on funding, as I've said, or scalability, and applications that have high potential impact. And we ask you to identify the pathways to impact for your projects, so far as that's possible. So I would emphasize that we're not completely naive in what can be done with £25,000. So successful grant holders will be given financial and logistical advice for their teams of work and for their teams, and led by ECR as PI. That's a key feature. And we do provide that sort of advice for you. There are often complexities here, but the centre will help you with that. You get capacity building and support for your project, or support in your role as PI, and we put a lot of effort into that. And Laura Bainbridge has been a brilliant ECR champion. She's unfortunately unable to make this meeting, but she's been really committed and done a lot of work with the cohorts of ECRs that's come through this program, which has been, a really happy making side to this program, I think. I'll talk a bit about that in a sec. And you will get support as PIs to develop engagement, impact, networks, so far as we're able to support you with those things. And we have a lot of relationships with different organizations around the country, and the follow-on plans that we've already talked about. Okay. Now, getting to sort of the detail. To be eligible for funding, a PI must be employed at an eligible UK-based research organisation. There's a long list on UCRI website for that, if you're in doubt. Be able to confirm the support of your institution to enable you to fulfil the commitments of your project. So you'll need a letter of support from your institution. Be an ECR as defined by the following: an individual who has a PhD or equivalent professional training, and obviously there's a debate to be had about that. What is equivalent professional training? And is within 8 years of their PhD viva. That comes from the original ESRC definition of an early career researcher. And of course, as we should, durations for career breaks, for family care or other reasons can be added to that 8 years. So our call is now open, as I hope you've noticed, and we're inviting proposals for collaborative teams led by ECRs, as I've said. The research grants up to £25,000, and they will be 12-month projects, and we'll emphasize the timeline in a moment. Grants to run from February 26 to January 27. So the deadline is the 29th of September this year for these applications, to then start in February 26 to January 27. Now, there's a sensitivity about the timeline that perhaps in previous years we haven't had, because our funding just simply ends at the end of April 2027. Have I got that right? Yes, that's the end. So that means that all the funding has to have been spent. So there's not a lot of leeway here, and we'll be absolutely following this up, because we just won't be able to pay for things later than that, because we won't have the funding. We welcome applications on any relevant topic, and I'll show you a list of the projects we funded so far, and they're pretty varied. So please note that we're interested in vulnerability and policing in broadly, rather than a really narrow definition. And I want to emphasize that one of the projects that we will fund is reserved for vulnerability in drug markets. And I really hope that we put this out last year and we didn't get many applications for this. So those of you with a drug spent in your professional careers, I should say, then please think about what that might mean in terms of vulnerability in drug markets. There's plenty of vulnerability in drug markets. And that's the Leah Moyle Commemorative Award, who tragically died before she could take up her grant. Okay, ECR support. So just briefly in terms of, so if Laura was with us, she'd be able to speak to that. She would be speaking to this, but she's taken this really seriously and put together support for each wave of applicants. And so she is the ECR champion, is her label, and has put together a lot of one-to-one and group support for the researchers. And that has included access to mentoring from an experienced academic for those that are interested, project management support and guidance from our centre manager, Roz. I've already talked about that in terms of the setup of these projects. We're able to provide guidance on some of the financial and practical issues that you can face. Communications and dissemination support. So we have our fantastic communications and engagement officer who will help with regard to thinking about, particularly towards the end stage, the outputs. We expect a standard 4-page report, which will be part of our centre outputs, but also thinking about, are there messages here, media work that needs to be done, and also support on impact and also academic publication. So quite a package of support, which I think is as I've already said, I think is the most important feature of our program, really. We're not a chuck the money at you and walk away organization. Neither are we a micromanaging organization. Somewhere in between those two in terms of we want to support you in your careers. That's what this is about. So the support offered so far by Laura has been monthly peer network and troubleshooting meetings facilitated by Laura. And there's been a really nice sort of network of researchers that have come together through these grants, and training from centre leadership on managing a project team. So I've done a few presentations on this, but also applications for research funding and so on. So sort of training from experienced academics, also part of the package. How am I doing on time? We're 20 minutes in, 25 effectively. Well, I'm nearly done on my bit, I think. So this is really just to show you the range of projects that we've funded so far. And you can check this all out on our website. And I kind of, as I've already suggested, take a look at the research we've got on like our 2-year projects. Also take a look at these ECR projects and where your idea might fit. Because I think we do ask you on the application form to sort of ask you to say where it fits with our wider research program. And again, people sometimes ignore it, and it's not terribly impressive if they don't have any clue what else we've been doing. So please do look. And I know that's a time issue for you probably, but I would emphasize to fill out your application form, you need to have that idea. Okay, is that me done? Let's have a look. Yes, Emma.
Thank you, Charlie. And I'm just going to ever so briefly talk about, there's just the one slide, and then we're really keen to open up to for questions. So just in regards to the application, so everything's on the website, so, and which you will have seen, obviously because you've joined up to the webinar. But please do carefully read through the guidelines, and particularly the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, will answer. Over the years that we've been doing these grants, we have built up quite a list of FAQs, and that will help you. So please, as your first port of call, do turn to that. Download, of course, and complete the application form. So that's a Word document template. Some of you may well have applied in the past or looked in the past to apply. Everything used to be on the one form, but we now do have a separate budget template, a very, very simple Excel template. But please remember to download that as well to submit your budget. Charlie's already mentioned the application deadline is Monday, the 29th of September this year. And then, of course, we will go through and check the eligibility of your application against the various criteria, which are, again, all shown in the guidance on the website. And in terms of timescales, depending on how many applications we get, we may do a shortlisting exercise, but we do have an external review panel, as well as some of our internal colleagues here at the centre. And reviews of your applications will take place during October and November this year. And then the funding panel will meet to agree the final awards in late November. And we are hoping to award roughly 4 or 5 awards. And Charlie mentioned earlier that one of those we are reserving for the Leah Moyles award. But in total, we expect to make around 4 or 5 awards in total, and we aim to let you know if you're successful by mid-December, and that's with a view, as Charlie already mentioned, for your projects to be starting in February. And we do have, but not much leeway. Life happens, and we sometimes need our no-cost extensions, etc., which we all try to not go through. But we've just got a very short few months buffer at the end. So one thing I will say on applications, and just to briefly touch on things where people have maybe not done so well or missed out in previous years, but also something we've added on to, as part of the application form. It's not a new question, but a bit of a clarification, and that's around data. Please do think about, especially if you're using secondary data sets, what is your access to the data? How are you going to get that? And let us know in your application forms, because sometimes we think, have you thought about how you're going to get that data? Are you realistically? But you might have had conversations prior to submitting your application. So please do, when you're telling us in your application what your proposal is, please do look at that. There's a question around timelines and your plans. Please do think about your data and timelines for things. And again, bearing in mind, it's a 12 months project. awarded £25,000. We're not expecting you to do everything. We just want clarity, that's all. So just some little tips there where perhaps people have maybe not been clear enough about their methodology. But I think that's everything I want to say on the application process, because it is all on the website. But of course, we're really keen to hear any questions. If you've got any questions about it now, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A, and I'll just take a look and see if we've got any questions. And I think haven't missed anything, have we, Charlie? I don't think. It's always good to good to check. But I think we've covered everything.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah. So let me just take a look at
We've
the
got
Q&A.
we've got some questions that we received
Yes.
by email, haven't we?
Yes. So should we go through those first, just whilst people are
Yeah.
having a little think as to what you might want to add in? So we received a question, and I'll just read them out. So one of them said, I'm not affiliated with any institution, but one of the British universities can support and submit my application on my behalf. Am I still eligible for the funding application? Unfortunately not. So one of the criteria to apply to us is you do have to be employed yourself through a UK institution. Doesn't necessarily have to be a university. So Charlie mentioned earlier there was a big list of eligible organisations, but it does have to be UK based. So hopefully that answers that question. And
Yeah,
then,
we should note that because this is ESRC money, the UCRI guidance on the use of, or the rules on the use of that money applies to us. So we're not going with their definitions for the hell of it, because we can't think of our own, but because that's how the money needs to be spent. So some of these things, some of these criteria to do with the fact that it's ESRC money.
yeah, and that question links as well with another question we had submitted as to whether an Indian scholar could apply. And again, just because of the funding and the way our funding is, you do have to be UK based at a UK institution. So unfortunately, you couldn't be the PI. However, if you go to our FAQ section on the website that I mentioned, there are other ways you can be involved with this grant. So you could be a co-I or a partner organisation with somebody who is the PI at the UK-based institution. So it doesn't completely rule you out, but it does rule you out of being the PI and directly applying for the fund yourself. But that's something that's worth thinking about, is you could be a partner with somebody else. To see what other, we had a couple of other questions. Oh, somebody, and we will come back to this person individually. So somebody asked a question around, can people who have previously applied and have been unsuccessful to the grant, can you reapply again? Absolutely. And then there was a bit of a sub question around, so you are eligible, that was the question, but there's a bit of a sub question around feedback and guidance in terms of your previous application, and we will contact you separately about that, because it's bespoke. But yes, you're certainly eligible, and we welcome people to reapply, and we'll get back to you if you're on the webinar now and you ask that particular question. We will be in touch with you over email regarding specifics.
We've had a new question here
Oh,
on
fantastic.
on partnership and asking for a bit more information about that. So, we're interested in doing research that's impactful, and we expect that sort of research to be done in partnership with other agencies. Doesn't have to be the police. Quite often it could be partnerships with NGOs or other agencies. Although we want it to be relevant to our mission in terms of vulnerability and policing, broadly cast. So those partnerships, I think, are key to the delivery of these projects, and indeed throughout our research program, those partnerships are absolutely crucial. And when they've not worked very well, then we have problems. So this is an important part of the application. And yes, and when the question asks, do we need partner letters? Now, I just need to be careful whenever I answer these questions. I can't remember whether it's an absolute requirement,
We do, Charlie. Yeah, so we
Yeah,
do ask it for
okay.
very short, not complex. Again, we're
Yeah,
trying to make this process as easy as possible for you to apply to, but we do require just a short letter, just briefly outlining what that support would be, if there's any in-kind support, any match funding. But that is all in the application criteria on the website, but it's not onerous and it's not designed to be onerous. But yes, we do require something to show their commitment,
yeah.
but just a very short letter.
And I think this links also to something Emma said earlier in terms of data, um, accessing secondary data sources, because partners, classically police partners, will need to reassure us that you'll be able to access data. And, it can take so long. And because we've got this real worry about the timeline, in terms of getting money spent before the end of the centre, it becomes all the more important that you can convince us that you will get access to police data if that is the nature of your research project. So that's, that relates to that partnership question, of course. And they can be based outside Leeds and York, absolutely. So this is a national program, and they can be in Scotland too, or Wales or Northern Ireland. So no restrictions there. Please don't think that we're parochial or, just focused on Yorkshire. This is open to Scotland without a doubt. So please be reassured on that front. Hopefully that answers your question.
And again, just to speak to that, I can't recommend the FAQs enough. Again, there is a question around that. It's about the impact that your proposal is going to have, being UK based. Again, I don't think we've ever had any partners from abroad, but again, it doesn't rule things out. It's about what the aims of your project are, what it's going to contribute to. So it does have to contribute to the values and principles of the centre, as obviously Charlie's mentioned earlier. But yeah, absolutely far and wide in terms of your partners. But I just cannot recommend enough the FAQs section. I really do recommend after this webinar you go and have a look at that, because it'll give you a bit more of a comprehensive answer on that one.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not getting many questions here. I would say, as a researcher myself that's applied for lots of grants over many, many years, including sort of smaller grants of this sort, that, the success rate's fairly high compared to a lot of these programs, to early careers research programs of different types. And I think, while I think a lot of us feel we don't need a lot of support, and we'll get on with it and deliver and so on. I think the package we provide is the really important one, and to be a PI is a step forward for those that haven't. Also, to employ someone is a big step forward. So quite a lot of our ECRs have employed researchers on their projects. So, and I think it's again, it's a really good way to add that string to your bow. So that really is important for CVs, and just for, like, not just for CVs, but getting that experience that allows you to deliver larger research projects, because you've managed someone and you begin to understand what that involves. And I don't want to be patronizing. Many of you may have already done this, but just in terms of the projects that we've funded, quite a lot haven't. And I think that's proved to be a really useful part of what this funding offers. So the funding really has tended to be for the PI and for a researcher if they've gone for that model. Funds can't be expended on experienced co-Is who would be expected to be paid for by the university as a matched contribution. So if you're bringing in co-Is from your or another university or institution, then they will need to be supported by, the university or organisation. The money's primarily, I think, up to 50%. I have to be careful about
Yeah.
these things, but I
Yeah.
think up to 50% for you for the PI.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of what we offer. So we expect that. We expect a good chunk of the money to be for the PI. What else?
And again, just on budget, your partner costs again are up to 30%. It is all in the guidance, but do, think about how you're going to use and maximise that budget to get the best for your projects. I'm just wondering, Charlie, whether it's worth briefly going back to EDI, because you mentioned it's so important. I think one thing from my experience with helping out with the grants that are just starting last year's round is with regards to EDI, where a couple of people sometimes maybe didn't do so well. It's just EDI in its full forms. So often we can sometimes be a bit stereotypical and maybe think about race or something like that as being EDI, which of course it is, but it's thinking really broadly, so neurodiversity, disability. So just to really highlight and point that out, that is really, EDI has got a very broad definition. So do think about that when you're thinking about your projects and partner organisations, because that is somewhere where I know, Charlie, you mentioned earlier, where people have not been so strong on in the past. So
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Absolutely. Um, yeah, I could blab on about this, but so much of it is in the criteria. So there's no point in just going over the criteria again. And I hope that, I mean, clearly we've done such a good job here. You don't have any questions because we covered all bases. But I hope it's been useful. And I'm repeating myself, but go to the website and learn there about the centre and how your ideas might fit with the programme of work that we've got ongoing. So I feel like we're ready to end. Emma, is there anything else we should be covering?
No, I think we've covered everything. Just really to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for your interest in our fund. And I've just popped up the last slide there with our email address. So please, if you have any questions, anything that isn't covered in our FAQs, I think sometimes we need a bit of time to reflect and we don't think of our question until half an hour after this, do we? We've given you a lot of information. So please do get in touch and best of luck with your applications.
Absolutely. Yeah, and please do send us your applications. Good.
Fantastic.
All right then.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.